Okay, welcome to Ping Track Part 2. Again, my name is Lee Howarth from Product Management at Ping. I'm going to introduce Jason Arrington and Glen Morgan from Ping's Federated Identity Management team. Over to you, Jason.
All right, thanks, Lee. So thanks, everybody, for coming. Today we're going to be talking about, really about provisioning, but specifically about some of the new projects that we've got going here at Ping Identity to try and really roll out a next-generation provisioning infrastructure. And that's what we've termed identity orchestration. So to start out with, I'll take a few minutes talking about the problems with provisioning and why we feel like it's been pretty critical for us to come out with a new approach to especially the cloud provisioning problems that our customers have had. Because we've had a lot of feedback about just the ways that a lot of the current solutions are really not necessarily meeting everybody's needs. So today we have a pretty extensive set of SaaS provisioners. You can kind of see the logos on the screen there. And we've invested pretty heavily, and Glen works closely with that team on building connectors that leverage the proprietary APIs that are provided by most of the vendors out in the space right now. As you're probably aware, if you've been to any of the SCIM sessions, the long-term goal is to try to get as many of these SaaS vendors to adopt SCIM as a standard as possible, so it becomes much easier to build something that will do that in a standards-based way. But as it stands, pretty much every one of these systems today has their own proprietary API, and so as Ping, one of our jobs is to try and simplify the provisioning process by writing connectors and making it so that you can actually use our infrastructure to provision to those. But as we've done that, we've gotten a lot of feedback from customers that just the current IDaaS or software as a service provisioning model doesn't necessarily have all the flexibility and capability that customers are needing. So like if you try to use a legacy provisioning tool, like one of the Stack IDM vendors' tools to do provisioning to a cloud application, you very quickly realize it was designed for on-premises. Not easy to extend to the cloud. There's a lot of custom dev required. You need a lot of infrastructure, and there's a lot of investment needed to administrate and maintain that stuff. Whereas the IDaaS tools, and I put Ping in this bucket as well, there's not as much flexibility in how you actually can do the administration, how you can do the mapping of attributes. It typically requires something like replication into a cloud directory, so effectively the old meta directory model, only now instead of being on premises, it's in the cloud. You don't get as much visibility into the state as you'd like. You're forced in a particular architecture, and there's not a lot of support for custom app integration. So with identity orchestration, we've tried to come up with a new architecture that really addresses both of those sets of problems. And rather than spend a lot of time actually showing what this is going to look like or describing it, we've put together a little 2-minute kind of explainer video that talks about the approach that we actually created for identity orchestration. So go ahead and hit it.
You're probably familiar with identity management, or IDM, but what is identity orchestration? It's similar to traditional identity management, but with a cloud-oriented twist. Identity management was designed to connect the user stores of systems like customer relationship management, enterprise resource planning, and email to the IT network. Users would be created, deleted, and changed from a single source of record. And because it was all in the corporate data center, you could lock it down to make sure administrators didn't try and make changes outside of the IDM system. Now that those systems have moved to the cloud, traditional IDM approaches don't work. Current cloud IDM products either force businesses to sync users to their cloud apps from a corporate user directory, or copy the user data from all their cloud apps into the cloud IDM vendor's directory. And there's no way to know if someone with admin rights in the cloud app is making unauthorized changes. With identity orchestration, you can define any user store to be the source for adding and removing users. You can also define a different source of record for specific user info. So something like a user's legal name is set from, say, the HR system, while the email address is managed somewhere else. We also monitor the connected systems for unauthorized changes. If an admin for a cloud app manually adds a user, we log it. And if he changes some aspect of a managed user's identity, we can go get the correct value and overwrite the unauthorized change. The best part? We do all of this without storing any sensitive data. Ping's cloud directory is there if you need it. And if not, you can still use orchestration to keep your existing user stores in sync. Like what you've heard so far? Give us a call to harmonize your cloud infrastructure with identity orchestration from Ping Identity.
Okay. So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to accomplish. Those are really the design goals we had for identity orchestration. And now here comes the exciting part, because for the first time we actually have here at Cloud Identity Summit, we've talked about this at Identify, some of the other conferences we've been at, but we're now at a stage in the project where we actually have working code that we're going to be going through a demo on, and Glen's going to be driving that now. So if you want to go ahead and switch over to the other system. Okay, so we're starting out with really 4 main scenarios that we want to walk through that kind of reflect what you just saw in the video. The first one is basic synchronization. So we have Microsoft Office 365 and Google Apps for Work specified as configured systems. And if you look, we've got both of them sitting there, and the user store of record, meaning the source that we're actually creating, is Google, right? So here you can see there's a bunch of users in Google. We've already got those guys created. If you go look at the Azure Active Directory user console, there's nothing in there yet. There's really 2 users. One of them actually matches one of the users in Google, and one of them does not. But that's who we've got right there. So what we're going to do first, we've created the 2 user stores, but we haven't actually connected them to define how the attributes are going to map between the 2 user stores. So Glen's going to go ahead and create a mapping now. So there's no arrangement in there, so he's going to go ahead and create a mapping arrangement, give it a name. Next, and then he's going to define which user stores are going to be part of this arrangement. We've got Google defined as the user store of record. We add Office 365 as a target that's going to get that user information. And we're going to go ahead and create that mapping arrangement. So now we've got that mapping arrangement, and we're going to go ahead and see what that's looking like. So you can see the attributes that are part of each of those systems. If we look at the details, you can see there's quite a few of those. The star shows that Google is where the attribute is coming from, and the O365 is a target for that information. If you take a look at the center tab, we also automatically determine whether there are any conflicts between the attribute mappings for those 2 systems. Not as big a deal when you've got 2 systems. When you've got 10 or 20, then yeah, you can have quite a few conflicts between the way the attributes are formatted in various types of systems. This will show you that conflict and be able to change that. The modeling tab is a very important piece because, as everybody knows, if you've worked at all with automated provisioning and deprovisioning, it's very easy to cause some pretty catastrophic effects on your system. So what we're doing right now is we're actually running a report where we're modeling that if we were to push this configuration into production, what would actually take place in each of those systems. So rather than just kind of pushing the implement button and hope that you didn't do something wrong and aren't going to be updating your resume, you can actually see what's going to happen here, which is, in this case, you've got 9 accounts that are being modified in Google Apps. And in Office 365, you're going to be creating 8 new accounts, modifying 1 existing account that you're now linking to the Google account, and you found 1 legacy account out there that didn't match anything in your store of record. So you're just going to sort of document that there's a couple of legacy users out there that are going to be unmanaged that exist in the target application. Okay? So with that, we liked that report. Didn't look like there was anything too catastrophic that was going to happen. So now Glen is going to go ahead and push that configuration live. Okay, so first he's going to go ahead and select the mapping. That's the CIS demo mapping. Click Next. It's going to show which user stores are part of that mapping. Next again. He can go take another look at that impact report that he ran, and at this point, we're done. Okay. So it's going to take a few seconds both to start up the orchestration engine and to actually reflect the changes in the Azure AD data store. So while we're waiting for that, a few points that I'd like to make. This first scenario, scenario 1 here, really isn't that different from traditional kind of IDaaS provisioning, with a couple of exceptions. The one main exception is that we're actually syncing directly from Google Apps to Azure Active Directory without needing any sort of our own cloud directory in the mix or an on-prem directory in the mix. So this is actually pretty cool that, you know, we don't really care which the data source is. We can sync between those 2. And the likelihood is that they probably won't have, like, Google won't be coming out with a tool to sync to Azure AD anytime soon. Those are competitive products. So kind of something new that we've been able to come up with. And also, there's a lot more flexibility in this tool than typically you'll see in those cloud applications. Typically, when you talk about an IDaaS system, they'll define a specific set of attributes that are supported. And if you need an attribute that's outside of the supported set, you're kind of out of luck. You need to request a feature enhancement or something to get that. What we've been told by customers is that not every customer has the same mapping requirements, and that's why we put a lot of flexibility in that system. Okay, so now if we go back to the Azure AD console and we refresh that user store, hopefully, if all goes well and we've made the appropriate sacrifice to the demo gods, you can see we've now got all of our users there. Glen can highlight one of those, take a look at Heather, and Heather Watson, you can take a look at her work inflow. So she's got all the attributes synced over from Google Apps, And we've done that with orchestration directly without having to import all that data into our system in order to sync that across. So that's scenario one. Looks like it worked out pretty well so far. That's pretty exciting. Okay? Yeah, thanks. All right, scenario two. So now we're going to add an additional connection. So one of the goals that we had was to try to make it as seamless as possible to integrate both on-prem and cloud-based user repositories. So here Glen's going to add another user store. He's going to select from our library of repositories, and in this case, we're going to connect to an Active Directory that we're actually linking to utilizing the SCIM capabilities of Ping Federate. So we've already configured the directory on the back end with the Ping Federate on-prem server. Glen's adding in all of the credentials to actually connect to that SCIM service. And when you're connecting to a user store, this is going to be different for every application that you connect to, depending on the requirements. There might be OAuth data in there might be username, password type credentials. But effectively, the orchestration system will guide you through what you have to enter in this to connect to a user store. And then you can actually push the test user store connection button, and it'll show you in this case, Glen's got all the right information in there. It was successful. And so now we've got a third user store that's there in the system that we can go ahead and connect to. It has its own set of attributes. You can see there's a lot of detailed attributes there that you can add in there. But once again, we've only got those first two systems in the mapping at this point. So we're going to go ahead and modify the mapping, and we're going to add the on-prem Active Directory to the repository. Okay? So we're going to extend the mapping. We've got one unmanaged user store with the PingFed on-prem. We're adding that in there. And now, in just a moment here, you'll see that new one pop up. And it's going to do the same thing where it shows us the mappings, and then the center tab again is going to show us that in the case of street address, there is a conflict. So what it's determined is that there is a mismatch between the formatting of a particular attribute between the user stores that we have. In this case, it's a street address. There's a length issue where there's a potential for the street address to be truncated because there's a different length requirement on one system versus another. In this case, we're not particularly concerned about that, so we're just going to dismiss it. The system has enough built-in logic to be able to actually recognize these potential conflicts, and some of them actually do require user intervention to resolve, but it lets you know that up front when you're first setting the configuration. Okay, let's go back and run our modeling report again. So we're going to go ahead and model the changes. In this case, we'll have 3 different user repositories that we're trying to model changes for, the existing 2 that we had already, and then adding in number 3 as well. Okay. So give this just a second. It should pop up with the change report. Any second now. All right. Okay. Oh, did you show the Active Directory and show that there's currently nothing in there? Uh-oh. There we go. There we go. So there's the results of our, oh boy. We had a connection timeout here, but that's okay. So what he's going to show is he's just going to show the contents of the Active Directory that we're connecting to right here. But while we were waiting for that, the modeling report came back. This is showing that there's going to be 9 new accounts created in that PingFed on-prem. And we're going to be modifying the other 2 to recognize that we're now linking in a 3rd user repository. Okay. Okay, we still struggling to get AD up there? All right, give it 1 second. All he's going to show here is that we're connecting to a particular container in Active Directory that currently has all the users because we've, well, as of right now, it's not going to have any of the users because we haven't started orchestration yet, but the modeling report shows that there will be 9 new ones created. Okay, so if that's not going to pop up there, we might need to skip showing the Active Directory and just move on to the next scenario there. Okay. The point here is that we're treating the on-premises directory exactly like we would a cloud directory. There's nothing, it's 2016, there's nothing inherently more valuable or more important about an on-premises directory versus a cloud-based directory. So we're not trying to force anybody to say, well, you have to center everything around your on-prem directory in order to do provisioning, or you have to center everything around our own cloud directory. You can architect your system based on where your user data needs to be and where you want it to go. Okay, so it looks like we connected to the Active Directory system there. You can see there's no users currently in that container. So now we're going to go back onto start the orchestration system. Once again, this is going to take a few minutes. We'll select the second configuration there of the demo, walk through. There's now 3 user stores. We can see the impact report once again. Click Done. And now we're once again waiting for orchestration to kick off and do the reconciliation to connect the to connect the new repository and feed all those users from, once again, Google Apps, which is our user store of record, and push those into that empty container for Active Directory. Now, what we're kind of showing so far is we sort of refer to it as birthright provisioning. So this is the case where you've got certain systems that all of your users are going to get access to just by virtue of being part of your organization. We also have the ability to filter on those, so certain systems only get provisioned to for a certain subset of your users based on a container or based on a group or based on an attribute. You can filter it down that way. And in future phases of I/O towards the second half of this year, we're actually going to be adding a workflow capability so that you can send out a request to an administrator to say, user so-and-so is going to be provisioned access. Would you like to approve that, yes or no? Okay, so it looks like we should have come back now, and now you can see all 9 of those users that were not there before have been provisioned into Active Directory. So that's good news. And if we go look at Heather, all those same attributes that she should have had are now showing up, and they were synced over from Google. Right? All right, so that's scenario 2. Scenario 2 is we're adding a third on-prem system. We were able to connect to that with no issues at all, other than a little timeout on the AD screen. Right? So now let's move on to scenario number 3. Scenario number 3 is really where things get kind of interesting, because now we're actually going to show, while we look at our mappings right now and show that all of the attribute data is coming from Google Apps, we're going to change that around a little bit. So we're going to specify that Azure AD, O365, is now the attribute of record for last name. What that means is that even though the new user account create and delete events are going to be coming from Google Apps, any modifications to the last name need to come from Azure AD, which is now the source of record for that system. Okay? Let's go ahead and apply that. And we've actually stopped orchestration so we can make a couple of changes at once here. So Glen's going to go and modify Heather Watson's user record in Azure AD, which is now the source of record for just that last name attribute. She got married. She's now changed her name to Heather Watson Brown, and we've added that in there. So we're going to go ahead and go back. We've applied the update to that user. We're going to go back into orchestration and start it back up. Okay. Once again, we're going to select that second because we just modified the existing mapping. We didn't create a new one this time. And you can see we're making some changes here. It's not going to believe that we're going to make changes initially because it actually has to go look at Azure AD to find out that there is a change to that repository. But as soon as we start that up, it'll start churning, and it's now going to go look at all 3 of those systems to find out where the changes need to take place. Okay? So let's see. So once again, there's a little timing issue here. We're waiting for things to sync, and the useful part of this configuration is that you might have different parts of the user's persona that are actually owned by different systems. So if you have, say, like an HR system, something like a cloud HR, like a Workday, that may be the source of record for quite a few of the attributes of the user data. But other parts of the user data might come from an IT system. They might come from an access management system. They might come from a lot of different places, and we're actually able to pull all that together so that the administrators for each individual system can change the things that are relevant for the users that come from their environment. Okay? Close that. All right, so if we go back and we look at the Google, so now once again, we're changing from Azure AD, and we're going to go look in Google to see if that change has taken place. So we're going to go ahead and refresh that. And if you now look, the username on Heather Watson is now changed to Heather Watson Brown. So that's scenario 3. That's actually pretty exciting because we've now specified a kind of an alternative option for synchronizing that particular attribute. So it's coming from Azure AD rather than coming from Google. Now, the final scenario is where it gets really interesting, because let's say that our Google Apps admin went in there and saw, wait a minute, this isn't Heather Watson Brown. Her name is Heather Watson. Why is her name changed to Heather Watson Brown? And he decides he's going to go in there and modify that back to Heather Watson. Okay? Now, keep in mind, this is no longer the source of record for that attribute. That should only be changed from Azure AD. So if we give this a few minutes, orchestration is still running. It's still monitoring both Azure AD, Google, and the on-prem directory to determine when things are changing in those different systems. And when we change that user, it should pick up the fact that there was a change that took place outside of the attribute of record system, and it should actually go in and rechange that back to Heather Watson Brown, which is exactly what happened there. Okay? We still waiting? Are we done on time?
We caught it too fast.
We caught it too fast. All right, so we had to redo it here. So he went and rechanged it to Heather Watson again one more time on that refresh. So in a moment, that should pick up the change. And the change that was made in Google, which was to make that change back to Heather Watson from Heather Watson Brown, will be reverted. The orchestration system will go retrieve the correct value from Azure AD, and it will push it back into Google so that that name will change back to Heather Watson Brown, which is exactly what's just happened right there. So those are our 4 scenarios in a nutshell. And everything that you just saw is actually real code. We've got a team that's been cranking on this stuff for well over a year now. And we're getting really excited about starting to push this out into production and give, first of all, over the second half of the year, some of our early adopters access to start playing with this and giving us some feedback, and then driving toward a release. So thanks, everybody, for your attention. I think we've got about 5 minutes for Q&A, and thanks to Glen and the team for the demo. Give him a hand.
Hi, I was wondering how you, what's the key structure basically? How do you do the matching between the disparate data sources? It seems like over time you could get duplicates if you weren't careful.
Sorry, I had a little hard time. It was a little muffled on the...
Oh, sorry. The key structure, how do you prevent duplication of records over time? Like maybe you had, some users over here and some users over here, and actually there was a couple that were overlapped, and they might potentially end up with duplicates.
Okay, that's a good question. So the question was, how do we prevent duplication of users? How do we potentially prevent some clashes on that? There's a few ways we do that. As we mentioned, we're not actually doing what a lot of the IDaaS systems do and sort of importing all those users into our own repository and syncing them. But what we are doing is we're actually creating a hash out of the user data, and we're storing locally a hashed sort of representation of that info so that we can determine if there's a change. And what that allows us to do is to create sort of a reference into our system so that we can tie each user to a specific reference, and that prevents that kind of clashing there. Now, all that really allows us to do is determine when a particular entry has changed. So the next time we go out and we search that information, we'll note that a particular entry now has a different hash, and that's how we do our change detection. But it doesn't mean that we don't, you couldn't hack into the ping orchestration system and then go pull all that attribute data out because we don't have it. Right? If that answers your question directly, but we can...
Typically, we'll match on a unique identifier, whether that's an employee ID. Every organization will have their unique identifier. In some places, it's an email address, and others, it's their employee number. Okay. And that's where the common linkage is between those accounts.
Yeah. So there is sort of a configurable matching capability that comes into play, yes. Okay.
Well, I have like a couple of questions. First thing is like Azure AD do have some kind of device information registered for users. So does this enable a device write back into the on-prem Active Directory?
The echo from the mic is making it actually hard to hear up here. So one more time on the question.
So Azure AD do have like device information for every user accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So do you guys do the device write back information into the on-prem AD using this orchestration?
The question is whether we synchronize the device information for Azure Active Directory. I'm not 100% clear on I don't believe we do that today. So the goal that we've got with orchestration is to be able to treat everything consistently. So in some cases, we're probably not going to go as deep as customers want, at least initially. Over time, we can add to that capability, but the goal is to really keep the problem at a very consistent level across all these different systems.
Okay. And second is like, how would the performance will be like when you have like more than like 20,000 users when you do the orchestration?
That's right. So the platform has been built for scale, so both vertically and horizontally. So this instance that we're running right now, this is running off a single machine.
Yeah.
But we have it to scale through. So when we detect that we need to create 10,000 accounts or modify 10,000 accounts at Google, we'll spin up a number of processes and do batch requesting so that we can keep the performance, separate.
Yeah, and just for the recording, what Glen was saying was that the system has been designed for both vertical and horizontal scaling. So based on the workload, we will actually add nodes. We'll add resources to be able to meet that requirement for high numbers of users. So got Glen a mic now. Okay. More questions?
Yeah. Over here. Do you plan to include the ability to roll back in the case of a catastrophic change, like you mentioned initially?
Yeah, the question is if we have the ability to roll back a catastrophic change. As of right now, one of the things we're trying to balance is the tightrope between having kind of the limited functionality of the IDaaS provisioning tools and the very rich functionality but extremely heavyweight administrative load of the legacy on-prem tools. As of right now, we are not anticipating creating any sort of a rollback capability. That's really what that modeling report is designed to do. It's designed to give you an option, give you the ability to say, abort, abort, I didn't want to do that before you actually caused the damage in the first place. Okay, question back here.
Here the attributes looks like a direct mapping between the systems. So if during provisioning or reconciliation, if I need to make some modifications to the data that I'm sending to the target system,
Yeah.
is there a way that we could use some basic expression language or any other
Yes.
piece of code that we can?
Yeah, that's very good. So we didn't actually get into that, but one of the things that we're doing is we're combining kind of some built-in metadata because we understand certain things about the attributes in different systems. So out of the box, what you actually saw when we created that mapping template was sort of the automatic attempt of the system to create a reasonable mapping instead of transformations between the attributes. But it is absolutely possible to drill down into that and to modify both the mapping and to apply some custom transformations to the attribute data so that it's modified when it goes from one system to another, like case changes or truncation or what any of those types of things. There is a kind of a scripting language built in to allow for that kind of transform. He's asked if it's custom
If we can do custom transformations?
or what the language is, I think.
The language is, I'm not sure exactly what it is right now. It's going through, there was some talk of it being in Groovy.
Yeah. JavaScript.
We're going with JavaScript.
I have a question around multi-value attributes. So is it possible to merge multi-values within a multi-value attribute, given that Google may be the value, so say for instance, we're talking about email. So Google email may be the default email ID, but I could have an exchange email and I want to merge both the values within the email attribute. So both of them
Yeah,
are the source of truth?
So the question is whether or not it's possible to do things like merge multiple valued attributes into a single valued attribute. Those types of transforms should be possible using the transform language. Yeah.
Okay, then we've got time for one more question.
I think we're just out of time. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry.
Give him the mic. He's right there.
Can you use a totally custom target, like a custom REST API endpoint? Can you orchestrate with that?
Yeah, so the question is if you can use a totally custom, if you can connect to a totally custom user store. As of right now, the answer is no, but that's absolutely part of the design. So we are going to have out of the box the ability to connect to sort of a generic SCIM 2.0 endpoint, but then also have the ability to add additional entries into our device library, for lack of a better term, so that you can connect to something custom that wasn't supported at the beginning. Yep. All right. With that, I think we're about out of time for Q&A. Thanks, everybody, for your attention. Any questions, feel free to come up, and we'll follow up after. Thank you.
Thank you.